"Ma'am, step out of the house with your hands visible." The command ripped through the quiet Georgia morning before the sun had fully risen, loud enough to shake curtains across the entire street. Red and blue lights flashed against rain-soaked pavement as 10 police cruisers boxed in the small brick home at the end of Willow Creek Drive. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Porch lights flicked on one by one. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked nonstop. Naomi Brooks stood frozen inside her kitchen, one hand gripping the edge of the counter so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Her coffee still steamed beside the sink. Just 30 seconds earlier, she had been packing her 8-year-old son's lunch for school. Turkey sandwich. Apple slices. A folded napkin with a smiley face drawn in blue marker. Normal things. Quiet things. But now helicopter blades chopped across the sky overhead, rattling the windows hard enough to make the picture frames tremble. "Mom?" A sleepy voice whispered behind her. Naomi turned quickly. Isaiah stood near the hallway in dinosaur pajamas, rubbing one eye, confusion written all over his small face. The flashing lights painted his skin blue, then red, then blue again. Naomi forced herself to breathe slowly even as another voice boomed outside through a loudspeaker. "Naomi Brooks! Exit the residence immediately!" Isaiah's breathing quickened. "Why are the police here?" he asked softly. Naomi looked toward the front window but didn't answer right away. 3 officers stood behind open patrol car doors with their hands resting near their holsters. Another officer pointed toward the house while speaking urgently into a shoulder radio. Rainwater glistened across the hoods of the cruisers under the rotating lights. The entire neighborhood looked like the scene of a manhunt. Naomi swallowed hard. Her pulse hammered against her ribs, but her voice stayed calm when she knelt in front of her son. "Everything's okay, baby," she whispered, smoothing his curls gently. "I just need you to stay close to me." Isaiah nodded even though fear already clouded his eyes. Naomi stood again and glanced toward the hallway wall where a folded American flag rested. Inside a glass display case beneath a silver military medal. The early morning light caught the edge of the frame. For a brief second, her eyes lingered there. Then came another pounding knock so violent it rattled the front door. "Open up now!" Naomi finally walked toward the entrance, barefoot against the cold hardwood floor. Every step felt strangely distant beneath the roar of helicopter blades overhead. She reached the door slowly and opened it halfway. Instantly, flashlights hit her face. Lieutenant Daniel Briggs stood at the front of the driveway beneath the pouring lights, broad shoulders squared, jaw clenched tight beneath the brim of his cap. Rain dotted the front of his uniform. He looked at Naomi like he had already decided exactly who she was before she ever spoke a word. "Naomi Brooks?" he asked sharply. "Yes. You are being detained pending an active investigation." Several neighbors had stepped onto their porches now despite the cold drizzle. Naomi could feel their eyes on her. Curious. Nervous. Watching. Briggs took 2 slow steps closer. "We have reason to believe a dangerous fugitive used this residence last night." Naomi blinked once. "That's impossible." Briggs ignored her answer. His gaze moved past her shoulder into the house. "Anyone else inside?" Naomi hesitated for half a second before Isaiah appeared behind her holding the sleeve of her sweatshirt. The boy looked tiny standing there beneath the flashing lights. One officer lowered his eyes awkwardly. Briggs didn't. "Step outside, ma'am," he ordered. Naomi looked at the row of police vehicles crowding the street, at the rifles resting across armored vests, at the neighbors whispering behind curtains, and finally back at the frightened child beside her. Then she drew in one long breath and quietly said the words that would change everything. "Before I do anything," she said calmly, "I need to make one phone call." Lieutenant Briggs let out a short laugh the second the words left her mouth. It was not the kind of laugh people made when something was funny. It was colder than that, sharper, like he had already decided she was wasting his time. Rain rolled off the brim of his cap while the red and blue lights pulsed across his face. "You are not really in a position to negotiate right now, ma'am," he said. Naomi did not answer immediately. She kept one hand gently behind Isaiah's back, steadying him as another gust of wind swept through the street. The smell of wet asphalt mixed with gasoline and damp pine trees from the woods behind the neighborhood. Somewhere nearby, a garage door slowly creaked open as another neighbor tried to get a better look at what was happening. Naomi could feel every eye on her front porch. The entire street had gone silent except for the hum of engines and the crackle of police radios. Briggs took another step forward. "Who are you planning to call?" Naomi looked directly at him for the first time since opening the door. Her face stayed calm, but exhaustion sat heavy beneath her eyes. Dark circles from years of overnight hospital shifts. Long hours. Bills. Grief she never fully unpacked. "Someone who knows me," she answered quietly. Briggs tilted his head slightly, unimpressed. "You have 30 seconds. Naomi nodded once and slowly reached into the pocket of her sweatshirt, while two officers immediately stiffened. One raised a flashlight higher. Another adjusted his stance beside the patrol car. Isaiah grabbed tighter onto Naomi's sleeve. "Easy," she whispered softly to him before pulling out an older cell phone with a cracked corner on the screen. Her fingers trembled slightly from the cold as she unlocked it. For a moment she just stared down at the contact list. There were not many names left in it anymore. Most people stopped calling after Marcus died. After the funeral. After the folded flag. After everyone slowly returned to their own lives while hers stayed frozen in place. She finally pressed one name. Ethan Cole. The line rang once. Twice. Briggs folded his arms impatiently while rain tapped steadily against the roof of the nearest cruiser. On the third ring, a deep voice answered immediately. "Cole." Naomi closed her eyes for half a second at the sound of it. Steady. Calm. Familiar. "Ethan," she said quietly. "It is Naomi." There was a pause on the other end. Not confusion. Recognition. Instant and sharp. "Naomi?" he said. "What happened?" Briggs exchanged a quick glance with another officer but said nothing yet. Naomi swallowed hard. "There are police outside my house. A lot of them." Her voice stayed controlled, but Ethan heard something underneath it. He always did. "Are you hurt?" "No, is Isaiah okay?" Naomi looked down at her son. The boy stood pressed against her side, trying hard not to cry even as helicopters circled overhead. "He is scared." Ethan's tone changed immediately. Harder now. Focused. "Put whoever is in charge on the phone." Naomi slowly lifted her eyes toward Briggs. Rainwater slid down the porch railing beside her, while the entire neighborhood seemed to lean closer waiting to hear what would happen next. "He wants to speak with you," she said calmly. Briggs stared at the phone for a long second before taking it with visible irritation. "Lieutenant Briggs," he said flatly into the receiver. "And you are?" The answer on the other end wiped the expression clean off his face. Briggs straightened instantly. One of the nearby officers frowned, noticing the sudden shift. Briggs listened silently now. No interruptions. No sarcasm. Just rain hitting his shoulders while the color slowly drained from his face beneath the flashing lights. Then his eyes moved back toward Naomi standing barefoot on the porch holding her frightened son close against her side, and for the first time since arriving, Lieutenant Daniel Briggs looked uncertain. Lieutenant Briggs lowered the phone slowly like it had suddenly become heavier in his hand. Rain dripped from his fingers onto the porch steps while the silence around him deepened. Even the officers behind the patrol cars looked uneasy now, shifting their weight as they watched his expression change. "Sir?" one deputy asked carefully from the driveway. Briggs ignored him. His jaw tightened once before he handed the phone back to Naomi without meeting her eyes directly. "He wants you to stay available," Briggs muttered stiffly. Naomi accepted the phone calmly and slipped it back into her pocket. Isaiah still held on to her side, his small sneakers half hidden behind her bare feet. The boy looked exhausted already, his face pale beneath the flashing lights. Naomi brushed a hand over the top of his head without taking her eyes off the officers. The cold morning air carried the metallic smell of rain and engine exhaust through the neighborhood, while distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the pine trees. Briggs stepped off the porch and motioned toward two deputies near the cruisers. "Clear the perimeter," he ordered quietly. "Nobody goes inside until further notice." The change in his tone did not go unnoticed. Minutes earlier, he had sounded like a man giving commands during a raid. Now he sounded cautious, controlled. One younger officer glanced toward Naomi with visible confusion before lowering his flashlight. Across the street, an elderly woman wrapped in a robe stood frozen beside her mailbox watching everything unfold. Another neighbor slowly lowered his phone after recording for several minutes. The energy on the street had shifted. Fear was still there, but now uncertainty crept in beside it. Naomi exhaled slowly for the first time since the sirens arrived. Her heartbeat still pounded hard enough to make her chest ache, but her face stayed composed. Years ago, long before Georgia, before nursing shifts and overdue utility bills, she had learned how panic spread through a room faster than smoke. Kandahar had taught her that. Fear infected people. Calm steadied them. Isaiah tugged gently on her sleeve. "Mom," he whispered. "Are we in trouble?" Naomi knelt down carefully despite the cold rain soaking through the knees of her sweatpants. "No, baby," she said softly. "We are going to be okay." Isaiah looked toward the line of cruisers. "Then why do they all look scared now?" Naomi followed his gaze. Briggs stood near the lead vehicle speaking urgently into his radio, while another officer typed something rapidly into a laptop mounted inside the patrol car. The lieutenant kept glancing back toward the house between sentences. Naomi did not answer Isaiah right away because the truth was complicated. Men like Briggs were not afraid of her. Not really. They were afraid of losing control once they realized they had judged the wrong person. A gust of wind pushed rain across the porch sideways, carrying with it the low thunder of another approaching vehicle somewhere down the main road. Naomi recognized the sound before she saw anything. Large engine. Heavy tires. Government issue. Briggs heard it too. His head snapped toward the entrance of the neighborhood. One by one, several officers turned the same direction. Headlights cut through the rain at the far end of Willow Creek Drive. Then came a second set behind them. Black SUVs. Large. Silent. No flashing lights. No sirens. Just dark vehicles rolling slowly past the police barricade like they belonged there more than anyone else. The first SUV stopped in the middle of the street directly across from Naomi's house. Water splashed softly beneath the tires as the engine idled low. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the helicopter overhead seemed distant now compared to the crushing silence settling over the block. Briggs swallowed visibly as the driver's side door opened. A tall man stepped out wearing a dark field jacket despite the rain. Gray streaked his beard at the edges, but his posture remained sharp and military straight. He scanned the street once before his eyes landed on Naomi standing barefoot on the porch beside her son. The hardness in his face softened immediately. "Naomi," Rear Admiral Ethan Cole said quietly. "I came as fast as I could." The rain seemed lighter the moment Ethan Cole stepped onto the street, though the sky above remained dark and heavy with clouds. Water rolled off the shoulders of his field jacket as he closed the SUV door behind him with calm precision. Two more men stepped out from the second vehicle, both carrying themselves with the same quiet discipline that made the entire block suddenly feel smaller. Nobody raised their voices anymore. Nobody moved carelessly. Lieutenant Briggs walked forward quickly, trying to recover some sense of authority. "Sir," he began, straightening his posture, "this is an active police investigation involving a fugitive connected to this address." Ethan did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Naomi standing on the porch beside Isaiah. The little boy stared back wide-eyed while clutching his mother's hand. Ethan's expression softened for half a second before he finally turned toward Briggs. "Connected how?" he asked calmly. Briggs cleared his throat. "A stolen vehicle tied to an interstate fraud suspect was found abandoned 2 miles from here early this morning. Registration records linked the vehicle to Naomi Brooks through an older title transfer under her late husband's name." Ethan glanced once toward Naomi. "And based on that," he said quietly, You surrounded the home of a military widow with 10 patrol cars before sunrise? Briggs shifted slightly under the weight of the question. We followed standard procedure. Ethan looked around the streets slowly. Flashing lights reflected across puddles. Neighbors stood frozen under umbrellas and half-opened front doors. Officers avoided direct eye contact now. Does this look standard to you? Ethan asked. Nobody answered. Naomi remained silent on the porch while cold rainwater slid down the railing beside her. Isaiah leaned gently against her side, exhausted from fear and confusion. Ethan finally walked toward them. The officers parted without being told. Naomi watched him approach with tired eyes. Up close, the years showed more clearly on Ethan's face now. Gray at the temples. Deep lines around the eyes. The kind carved there by loss, responsibility, and too many funerals. But his voice stayed steady when he reached the porch steps. You should have called sooner, he said softly. Naomi gave a faint, weary smile. I was hoping I would not need to. Ethan nodded once, understanding more than she said aloud. His eyes moved briefly toward the folded flag displayed through the front window. Then he looked down at Isaiah. You must be getting tall on me, he said gently. Isaiah hesitated before giving a small nod. Mom said you used to work with my dad? Ethan's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Your father saved my life more than once. Naomi lowered her eyes for a moment as silence settled between them. The rain tapped softly against the porch roof overhead, while distant thunder rolled farther away now. Briggs climbed the first porch step carefully. Sir, he said, trying again. With respect, we still need to search the property. Ethan turned slowly. Calm remained in his expression, but something colder had entered his eyes. Do you have a warrant? Briggs paused. Not yet. Then you are done here. The lieutenant opened his mouth, then stopped himself. One of the deputies behind him looked down immediately. Ethan stepped fully onto the porch beside Naomi now, standing between her family and the line of cruisers without any dramatic gesture or raised voice. He simply stood there. Solid. Certain. Like a wall finally placed between them and the storm. Then his gaze shifted toward the framed metal hanging inside the hallway. Water dripped steadily from the edge of his sleeve as he stared at it. You still keep it there, he murmured quietly. Naomi looked toward the metal too. Marcus earned it, she said. Ethan nodded once. No, he answered softly. The truth is, both of you did. Briggs frowned slightly, confusion crossing his face. Ethan turned back toward the officers gathered in the rain. You people have no idea who this woman is, he said. And for the first time since the sirens arrived, every officer on the street listened without interrupting. The street stayed completely silent after Ethan spoke. Rainwater trickled down the curb in thin streams while red and blue lights flashed across soaked mailboxes and parked cars. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody even reached for a radio. Lieutenant Briggs stood at the bottom of the porch steps with his shoulders tense, trying to maintain composure as neighbors watched from every direction. Ethan looked toward the officers one by one before speaking again. 12 years ago, he said calmly, during an operation outside Kandahar, my convoy was hit less than half a mile from extraction. Naomi lowered her eyes immediately. Her fingers tightened slightly around Isaiah's hand. Ethan noticed, but continued anyway. Communications were down. Visibility was gone. Half my team was injured. The sound of rain tapping against patrol car hoods filled the pause between his words. The medic assigned to us that night carried 2 wounded operators across open ground while taking fire herself. Briggs shifted uncomfortably. One of the younger deputies slowly removed his cap. Ethan's voice never rose, but every sentence landed heavier than the last. That medic was Naomi Brooks. Naomi closed her eyes briefly as memories she spent years burying flickered back without warning. Sand whipping through the dark. Smoke. Flashlights cutting through chaos. Marcus shouting her name somewhere behind her. She pushed the memories down again before they could fully surface. Isaiah looked up at his mother with surprise. You were in the army? he whispered softly. Naomi brushed rainwater from his forehead. A long time ago, she answered quietly. Ethan nodded toward the metal visible through the hallway window. Her husband stayed behind to secure the evacuation route after she got us out. The street went still again. Even Briggs stopped moving entirely now. Ethan's eyes hardened slightly. Marcus Brooks died making sure the rest of us made it home. Naomi's jaw tightened, but she stayed silent. She had learned years ago that grief sounded louder when spoken aloud. One of the officers near the cruisers looked toward the folded flag inside the house and slowly lowered his gaze. Another cleared his throat awkwardly. The entire mood of the street had changed now. Not fear anymore. Shame. Briggs tried once more to steady himself. Sir, nobody here intended disrespect. Ethan turned toward him immediately. You surrounded a decorated veteran and military widow with 10 cruisers before dawn while her child watched from inside the house. His voice remained calm, but colder now. Tell me what part of that sounds respectful to you. Briggs opened his mouth, then stopped. Rain rolled steadily down the side of his face while the flashing lights reflected across puddles at his feet. Behind him, one deputy quietly stepped back toward his vehicle as if suddenly wanting distance from the entire situation. Isaiah looked up at Ethan carefully. My dad was brave. Ethan's expression softened instantly. Your father was one of the bravest men I ever knew. Isaiah looked down at the porch floor for a moment before asking quietly, Was my mom brave too? Naomi immediately shook her head slightly. Isaiah. But Ethan answered before she could finish. Your mother carried people twice her size through places most people could not survive 10 minutes in. Naomi looked away toward the rain-covered street, uncomfortable under the weight of attention now fixed on her. She had spent years trying to disappear into ordinary life. Night shifts at the hospital. School lunches. Grocery bills. Quiet routines. She never wanted uniforms or medals to define her son's childhood. But standing there beneath the flashing lights, she realized the past had found her anyway. Briggs finally removed his cap slowly. His voice sounded different now. Smaller somehow. Mrs. Brooks, he said carefully, if mistakes were made here this morning, then I. He hesitated. The apology caught somewhere in his throat. Naomi looked at him steadily through the rain. Her face showed no anger. That somehow made the silence harder for him to bear. Then Ethan glanced toward the line of patrol cars still filling the street and said quietly, The first thing you people saw this morning was a black woman alone in a small house. His eyes moved across the officers standing frozen in the rain. And somehow that was enough for all of you to assume the worst. No one spoke after Ethan's words settled over the street. The flashing lights still turned slowly across the wet pavement, but the chaos that had filled Willow Creek Drive earlier now felt hollow, almost embarrassed by itself. Rain fell softer than before, tapping gently against rooftops and patrol car windows. Naomi stood quietly beneath the porch light with Isaiah pressed against her side, both wrapped in the strange silence that follows after people suddenly realize they were wrong. Lieutenant Briggs lowered his eyes toward the ground for a long moment. Water dripped steadily from the brim of his cap onto the porch steps below him. Somewhere behind the cruisers, a police radio crackled faintly before being turned down. Nobody wanted noise anymore. Ethan finally stepped closer to Naomi and lowered his voice. You should go inside, he said softly. Naomi nodded once but did not move right away. Her eyes drifted toward the street instead. Toward the neighbors standing in bathrobes. Beneath umbrellas. Toward the officers avoiding eye contact. Toward the patrol cars still lined across the block like a wall built from fear and assumptions. She looked tired suddenly. Not weak. Just tired in the way people become after carrying too much for too many years. Isaiah leaned his head gently against her arm. Mom, he whispered. Can we go back inside now? Naomi looked down at him and managed a small smile. Yeah, baby, she said quietly. We can go inside. But before she turned, her eyes caught something near the edge of the porch steps. One of Marcus's medals had fallen from the display case inside the hallway sometime during the commotion earlier that morning. The small silver star now rested near the wet edge of the porch where rainwater had begun collecting around it. Naomi stared at it silently for a second before kneeling down. The cold rain soaked through her sweatpants again as she carefully picked the medal up with both hands. Mud streaked lightly across the medal. Isaiah watched quietly while Naomi wiped the rain and dirt away using the sleeve of her sweatshirt. Her movements were slow and careful, almost reverent. Ethan stood beside her without speaking. The officers watched too. Naomi finally held the medal still in her palm as water dripped from the edges onto the porch floor. For a brief moment, the entire street seemed to disappear around her. No patrol cars. No helicopters. No flashing lights. Just memory. Marcus laughing in desert heat. Sand caught in the wind. His wedding ring tapping against hers before deployment. The sound of his boots crossing their kitchen floor years ago before everything changed forever. Naomi swallowed hard and blinked the memories away before Isaiah could notice tears forming in her eyes. Ethan looked down at the medal quietly. He would hate this, he murmured. Naomi let out the faintest breath of a laugh. Yeah, she said softly. He always said attention was dangerous. Ethan nodded once. Still true. The porch light flickered gently above them, while rain continued falling in silver lines through the early morning darkness. Across the street, the elderly woman who had been watching everything slowly lowered her umbrella and placed a hand over her heart before quietly stepping back inside her home. One by one, curtains closed. Phones disappeared. The spectacle was ending. Lieutenant Briggs removed his gloves slowly and looked toward the line of cruisers behind him. His voice sounded restrained now, stripped of the confidence it carried earlier. Pack it up, he ordered quietly. Doors shut softly across the street as officers returned to their vehicles. Engines started one after another. The red and blue lights that had flooded Naomi's home all morning began disappearing from the wet pavement. Ethan glanced toward Naomi as she stood again holding the medal carefully against her chest. You did not deserve this, he said. Naomi looked at the emptying street for a long moment before answering. No, she said quietly. But people like me get used to surviving things we never deserved. And standing there beneath the fading lights and soft Georgia rain, nobody around her could pretend they did not understand exactly what she meant. The last patrol car had just started pulling away when another black SUV rolled slowly into the neighborhood from the opposite direction. Its headlights cut across the wet pavement before stopping beside Ethan's vehicle. The engine idled quietly while every remaining officer on the street turned to look. Lieutenant Briggs frowned immediately. Who is that now? He muttered under his breath. Ethan already knew. His expression sharpened slightly as the passenger door opened. A woman stepped out holding a leather folder tight against her chest to protect it from the rain. Mid-40s. Blonde hair tied back neatly despite the weather. Dark federal jacket. Calm eyes. She walked straight toward the porch without hesitation while the officers exchanged nervous looks. Admiral, she said with a quick nod toward Ethan. Then she turned directly to Naomi. Mrs. Brooks. Naomi recognized her after a second. Claire? The woman gave a small smile. It has been a while. Lieutenant Briggs stepped forward carefully. And you are? The woman reached into her coat and produced federal credentials. Claire Bennett. Department of Defense Legal Affairs. Briggs's face tightened instantly. Claire opened the folder in her hands while rain dotted the papers inside. Lieutenant, she said evenly, the vehicle connected to your investigation was sold 3 years ago through a military surplus auction tied to a deceased contractor currently under federal review. Briggs blinked once. What? Claire flipped one page toward him. Your suspect altered registration records using the identity of Sergeant Marcus Brooks after accessing stolen veterans database information. The rain seemed louder suddenly. Briggs stared at the documents without speaking. One deputy beside him whispered a curse under his breath. Claire continued calmly. Which means the only reason this address appeared in your system this morning was because somebody used the name of a fallen soldier to hide criminal activity. Naomi closed her eyes briefly as Isaiah looked up at her in confusion. Ethan's jaw tightened hard enough to show beneath his beard. Claire looked directly at Briggs now. Federal investigators identified the fraud connection late last night. Briggs slowly looked up from the folder. Then why was local law enforcement not informed? Claire held his gaze for a long second before answering. We were. Silence crashed across the street again. Briggs stared at her. Excuse me? Claire pulled another sheet from the folder. An encrypted notification was sent to County Dispatch at 2:14 this morning instructing officers not to approach this residence due to military family protections tied to Sergeant Brooks. Briggs's face lost color almost instantly. One of the deputies near the cruisers turned toward him sharply. Sir? Claire's voice stayed calm, but colder now. Your department acknowledged receipt at 2:21. Ethan looked slowly toward Briggs. You knew? Briggs immediately shook his head. No, His voice caught. I never personally saw, but nobody fully believed him anymore. Claire closed the folder carefully. Whether you saw it or ignored it, she said quietly, the result was the same. Naomi stood completely still on the porch while rainwater slid from the roof beside her in thin silver streams. Isaiah looked between the adults, trying to understand why the officers suddenly seemed frightened. Ethan finally stepped closer to Briggs. You brought 10 police vehicles to the home of a decorated veteran's family after being warned not to. Briggs swallowed hard. Admiral, I was trying to protect the neighborhood. Ethan's eyes hardened. No, he said quietly. You were trying to control a situation before you understood it. Briggs lowered his gaze again. Claire looked toward Naomi now, her expression softening slightly. Mrs. Brooks, she said carefully, there will be a formal investigation into what happened here this morning. Naomi looked at the nearly empty street. The puddles. The fading lights. The neighbors pretending not to stare anymore. Then she glanced toward the folded flag inside her home. I do not want revenge, she said softly. Everyone looked at her. Naomi tightened her grip gently around Marcus's medal still resting in her hand. I just want my son to grow up in a country where people see him as a child before they see him as a threat. The rain kept falling after she said it. Quiet now. Steady. And not a single person on that street could look her in the eye without feeling the weight of those words settle somewhere deep inside them. The rain finally began to slow just after sunrise. Gray clouds drifted low above Willow Creek Drive while the last police cruiser disappeared around the corner without sirens or flashing lights. The neighborhood looked exhausted now, as if the entire street had aged overnight. Wet leaves clung to storm drains. Water dripped steadily from porch roofs. Somewhere nearby, a lawn sprinkler clicked softly to life like the world was trying to return to normal again. Naomi stood quietly near the front door holding a towel around Isaiah's shoulders while Ethan and Claire spoke in low voices beside the black SUVs. The cold had settled deep into her bones, but she barely noticed it anymore. Isaiah looked up at her carefully. Are they all gone now? Naomi glanced toward the empty street. Yeah, she answered softly. They are gone. The little boy nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in his eyes. Ethan walked back toward the porch a moment later with Claire beside him. Neither looked angry anymore. Just tired. Claire held the leather folder against her side, while Ethan removed his rain-soaked gloves slowly. There will be reporters asking questions by this afternoon, Claire said gently. Naomi gave a faint smile that never fully reached her eyes. They usually come after the damage is already done. Claire lowered her gaze slightly because she knew Naomi was right. Ethan looked toward the display case inside the hallway where Marcus's folded flag now rested beside the clean metal Naomi had carefully returned earlier. Morning light touched the glass softly through the front window. Marcus used to say people are quick to salute sacrifice after they survive because of it, Ethan murmured quietly. Naomi folded the towel tighter around Isaiah. He also used to say apologies sound different after fear disappears. Ethan gave a small breath of a laugh under his beard. That sounds exactly like him. The front gate creaked softly then. Everyone turned. Lieutenant Briggs stood near the sidewalk alone now without the line of cruisers or officers behind him. His cap rested in his hands instead of on his head. For the first time all morning, he looked less like a commanding officer and more like a man carrying something heavy he could no longer defend. Claire immediately straightened beside Ethan, but Naomi gently shook her head before either of them spoke. Briggs walked slowly toward the porch steps and stopped several feet away. Rainwater still darkened the shoulders of his uniform. He looked at Naomi directly this time instead of past her. "Mrs. Brooks," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Naomi remained silent. Briggs swallowed hard before continuing. "What happened here should not have happened." His voice cracked slightly under the weight of the words. "I saw a situation and made assumptions before I saw the people standing in front of me." Isaiah watched him carefully from behind Naomi's arm. Briggs glanced toward the child and lowered his eyes briefly. "Your son should never have had to see this." The street stayed silent around them. No helicopters. No sirens. Just birds beginning to wake in the trees after the storm. Naomi studied Briggs for a long moment before answering. "Do you know what scared me the most this morning?" Briggs shook his head slowly. Naomi looked out toward the wet street where the patrol cars had been parked hours earlier. "It was not the lights," she said softly. "It was how normal all of it felt to everyone else." Briggs looked down immediately. The words landed harder than any accusation could have. Ethan remained still beside the porch while Claire quietly closed the folder in her hands. Naomi shifted the towel gently around Isaiah's shoulders again before speaking once more. "I do not need revenge, Lieutenant." Briggs slowly looked back up at her. Naomi's expression stayed calm, but firm. "I need people like you to stop seeing danger every time you see someone who looks like me standing alone." Briggs nodded once. Slowly. Shame written plainly across his face now. Then Isaiah stepped slightly forward beside his mother and asked in a small voice, "Does this mean you are not mad at us anymore?" Naomi looked down at her son with surprise before Briggs answered quietly. "No, buddy," he said softly. "Your mom reminded us how to do better." By late afternoon, the storm clouds had finally broken apart above Willow Creek Drive. Soft, golden sunlight stretched across the neighborhood, warming the wet sidewalks and glistening rooftops left behind by the rain. The street looked almost peaceful now, like the morning chaos had been some strange nightmare people were too ashamed to mention out loud. Naomi stood quietly in her small front yard wearing one of Marcus's old army hoodies while Isaiah knelt beside her helping press fresh soil around a line of white lilies near the porch steps. The flowers had belonged to Marcus. He planted them every spring because he said they reminded him that quiet things could survive hard seasons too. Isaiah pushed dirt carefully around the roots with both hands before looking up. "Do flowers get scared during storms?" he asked softly. Naomi smiled faintly. "Maybe," she said. "But they still grow afterward." Isaiah seemed satisfied with that answer. A warm breeze moved gently through the trees overhead while somewhere down the block a lawn mower hummed faintly in the distance. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Naomi had almost forgotten how much peace could exist inside ordinary moments. Ethan leaned quietly against the front gate nearby speaking into his phone with Claire before finally ending the call. He walked toward Naomi slowly across the damp grass. "The investigation is already moving fast," he said carefully. Naomi nodded once without looking up from the flowers. "People move quickly once embarrassment becomes public." Ethan gave a tired smile because again, she was right. He glanced toward the neighborhood around them. Curtains still shifted occasionally as people peeked outside, but now the expressions were different. No suspicion. No fear. Just quiet reflection. Some waved awkwardly when Naomi noticed them. Others looked away entirely. Ethan slipped his hands into his jacket pockets. "The county commissioner called twice already." Naomi finally looked up. "And?" Ethan exhaled softly. "They want to issue a public statement." Isaiah tilted his head. Like on television? Ethan smiled gently at him. Probably. Isaiah thought about that seriously for a second before asking. Are they going to say sorry to Mom? Naomi looked down at the little boy and brushed loose dirt from his cheek with her thumb. Sometimes people apologize because they are sorry, she said quietly. And sometimes they apologize because they finally understand. Ethan watched her carefully after she said it. Even after everything that morning had done to her, Naomi still chose gentleness over bitterness. That was the part most people never understood about strength. It did not always shout. Sometimes it simply stayed kind after surviving things that tried to harden it. A black sedan rolled slowly down the street, then stopped near the curb. Lieutenant Briggs stepped out alone, wearing plain clothes this time instead of a uniform. No badge visible. No authority surrounding him. Just a man carrying a small cardboard box in both hands. Ethan straightened slightly, but Naomi placed a calm hand against his arm. Briggs approached slowly before stopping at the edge of the yard. I found these at dispatch, he said quietly, holding out the box. Naomi opened it carefully. Inside were several photographs from Marcus's military service that had been misplaced years earlier during records transfers after his death. One showed Marcus smiling beside Ethan in desert fatigues beneath a blazing Afghan sun. Another showed Naomi herself laughing with dirt across her face while sitting on the back of a transport truck years before Isaiah was even born.